Okay, well, welcome everyone. We are very lucky to have with us today Savitri, who's going to be speaking to us about how to use social media responsibly during a crisis. There'll be a Q&A at the end, and it is a really exciting presentation, so you're in for a treat today. So it's over to you, Savitri.
Thank you so much, Amy. Thank you for having me on board, and everyone attending, thank you so much for participating. Okay, so let's start with the first slide. So what you can see is the social media in crimson surrounded by a whole lot of words and terms. So you can see community, entertainment, connection, communications. And that's the key, communications. We are all communicators. And if you look at this picture, and what I want to say with this picture is how big the responsibility is when we use social media. We might not even be aware of it, but when we put something out on the net, it is very careful to do so in a responsible manner. Now, what is also important is that we are in a crisis at the moment, in the pandemic COVID-19 crisis. So as you can see in the next slide, we are in a situation of social distancing, 2 meters distance. And even though the Swiss government and other governments from other countries have decided to ease up on the restrictions and COVID-19 controls, they have still recommended to keep a social distance. So for example, if you take the tram or the bus, you may have seen the ticker or heard a voice telling you that if you cannot keep a safe distance, to wear a mask, for example. So now with this social distancing, what is happening is that we are moving now towards searching for a virtual closeness online. Now, what is important to know is what makes a crisis. So in the next slide, you can see an example of a definition I took from the Merriam-Webster dictionary. And what is striking about a crisis is it is unstable. It is a crucial, unusual time. And there is a big change, an unexpected change. And especially it has the distinct possibility of an outcome which might be highly undesirable. So now, as you see on the next slide, obviously we perceive the COVID-19 pandemic as an existential crisis. We are thinking, what if I get this virus? What if my loved ones get the virus? My friends, my family, my relatives? What if I become a carrier, for example, and give it to someone else without knowing it? So one reaction we can see to the crisis is panic buying. And social media, of course, was full of these pictures about hoarding toilet paper. And I remember I myself went to buy groceries, empty shelves, and not just with the toilet paper, but with other products too. So one reaction was panic buying. We were completely triggered with fear. And then, of course, the next picture, the big debate about masks. Does it protect people? Does it not protect people? Again, big discussions on social media. Yes or no? Is it exaggerated? What? And then, of course, you see the picture down. Home is where the work is. Suddenly, everyone is stashed up at home within their own four walls. You're working from home. There is no longer this geographical separation between workplace and your home place. And well, as you know, so many people, especially with families, with children, suddenly it becomes very uncomfortable. One is unused to this thing. And finally, questions upon questions. How does the coronavirus affect the economy? How does it affect me? How does it affect my current situation, my job, etc., etc.? And in the next slide, this social distancing and a craving for social closeness and us having to work from home has led to a huge increase of online use and also of social media. And as you can see in the picture, this is exactly what we're doing. We're video conferencing. And this, the next slide, leads us to the question about social media and its role in the COVID-19 crisis. So as I mentioned before, we are moving from social distancing to constructing social closeness on social media. And what is also so crucial is the information and misinformation on social media. And this is where you have to think about responsibility and also irresponsibility. This also ties into sharing is caring and sharing is scaring. So now the positive aspect of sharing is caring is you probably remember the clips of Italians on the balconies making music, like opera singing, playing the guitars. And this was during the early stages of the shutdown in Italy. And this was in order to communicate solidarity, this community feeling, to raise courage, to say, listen, guys, we can get through this. We're going to show Corona what we can do. Now, the other aspect is sharing is scaring. And that led, for example, to panic buying, to squirreling away, and then also misinformation related to healthcare and medical information. And this is so crucial, and this can be so dangerous too. So I remember there was a message which was going viral on social media, also on WhatsApp, which said, you just have to gargle with a lot of hot water and it'll kill the virus which is sticking at the back of your throat. Many of us, most of us will be inclined to say, oh, this is just a bad joke. We'll be inclined to laugh. But there will be people who will actually take this seriously at face value and go ahead and do it. So that is why we have to be careful about what we post on social media. Then the other aspect is, of course, flooding of news, push notifications, news, corona, corona, corona. And then finally, responsible marketing. There have been businesses which try to exploit the fears, the vulnerabilities, and use the coronavirus pandemic to really gain a profit in a manner which was ruthless and came across as cold-blooded. So now, when we speak about using social media responsibly, we're going to move on to an example in the next slide. So in this example, we have got Professor Marcel Salate. He's an epidemiologist and director of the Digital Epidemiology Lab at the École Polytechnique Fédérale de Lausanne. And around the beginning of May, there was an interview with him, which you can read in the Basel Zeitung. I think it is also in the Tagesanzeiger. You need a subscription, but the important thing is what he said about social media. I've also included an English translation. I also work as a translator. So I decided to translate this for you. So he was asked, you've been in the spotlight for about 3 months. How does it change your everyday life? And he said something very, very crucial. He said that he has become more careful about the statements on Twitter. And this is why I've highlighted it in bold. He said, knowing that my statements could easily wind up quickly in a newspaper, I'm now thinking twice about whether I can still stand by my statement in a week from when I posted. So now this is what I can really say is a responsible use of social media. Now we're going on to a second example in the next slide. And you may have read in the news recently about Dr. Mark Schäufele from the Universitätsspital Zürich, so the University Hospital of Zurich, posting his views on COVID-19 on YouTube. So I've just included a link over there about his posting on YouTube. I went on YouTube to watch his video. I was able to do so, and then the post disappeared mysteriously. Other people had saved the file of the post and reposted on YouTube, and those two vanished mysteriously after a few days. So there's a bit of a competition out there on when it's going to be reposted, how long it stays on YouTube, and when it disappears again. I got lucky enough and was able to view the whole thing. So basically what he was saying was, one should not panic. It is not as bad as it sounds, and only few people die, etc., etc. Now, in the next slide, what happened was a mighty conflict was created, and there were two camps. So camp number one said, this guy is really brave. Finally, someone who's not panicking, who's not exaggerating, who says what's what, and does not scare us. And then there was the other camp which said, this man is being irresponsible. I mean, what he's doing is he's making the virus sound harmless, as if it could not hurt anyone. So what I decided to do was I went to the Facebook page of the University Hospital of Zurich to see if I could find comments. And as you can see in the next slide, I was able to find a poster who had submitted their comments. And I have wiped out the name just in case they would change their mind and delete their comments. So I'm just going to translate this briefly for you. So what he said is, don't you think it is at a limit, if not even irresponsible, for a doctor who works at your hospital, and here they mention Herze Schäufele, actually it would be M, but it is clear who it is. But isn't it irresponsible for someone like that to post a video on the internet? Has this doctor forgotten about the pictures in Italy? I think it is not acceptable for someone working at a hospital to place himself on a level with the others. Kind regards from Northern Germany. And the social media team responded saying the video and the statements made by Dr. Mark Schäufele, actually it's Mark Schäufele, so typo over there, simply are his own personal opinions, his views, and they do not stand, they have nothing to do with the University Hospital of Zurich. And then they continue, the University Hospital of Zurich takes care that all patients who are suffering from health problems can be handled without any delays, and well, kind regards, social media team. So almost a bit of marketing in that second paragraph. I would say this is not quite the answer the person who commented had been expecting, because they responded and said, I have nothing against your hospital, but this person is working over there. I assume that he is going to represent his opinion in his job, and then we would have a problem. Or he's a different person altogether at a hospital, and I would find it even worse. Well, thank goodness I do not have to be treated by him, but still, your hospital has ended up in the spotlight because of this doctor, and not in a very positive manner. Kind regards. And there was no answer to that from the social media team. I checked again this morning and there was nothing. So that was the end of the conversation. Now, in the next slide, I would be very interested to know how you would have reacted if you had been in the shoes of the social media team. So just type in your ideas or what you would have responded if you had been the social media team. So just do so in the chat in your Zoom toolbar. Okay, so is there anyone who would, oh yeah, I would have continued to argue. Thanks, Amy. All right, so now what is interesting is how did the employer of Dr. Mark Schäufele react? Because they were in a quandary because they had the employee posting his views on social media and his views were not those of the employer. So what they wrote, well, in a written statement to the newspaper was simply the video and the statements of Dr. Mark Schäufele are simply his own personal views, and they do not stand in any connection with the University Hospital of Zurich. That's it. And well, you can see that the hospital was really in a catch-22. Their employee had dragged them into a tough spot, and what could they do for damage control? They were in a really tight spot. And this is when it comes to posting responsibly on social media. If you're an employee, you also have to think about how this will affect the company you work for. So the conclusions we can draw from the situation in the next slide is emotions. Emotions. So in a crisis, as we know, our emotions start to really come up. They can overwhelm us, they can trigger us, they will influence the way we communicate, the way we act, the way we react, and we might not even be aware of it. And they will also influence the way we post on social media, because after all, it is a part of communication. So, as I said, crisis impacts emotions and it just spills over into the way we communicate. And it is easy to get carried away. We are all human beings. And once we have that adrenaline and cortisol pumping into our veins, it is difficult to override that. And then, of course, emotions, fears, and vulnerabilities are exploited. And it's far more easy to do so because we are so vulnerable, because we are uncomfortable, and we're desperately seeking to be comforted, to go back to a comfort zone. So now, what is important is setting up a social media policy in order for us to handle this discomfort and to have a plan of action. So as we can see in the next slide, we can start with the following. So we've got these W's, these 5 W's, and the one H. So that would be, for example, if you use Twitter as an example, what am I tweeting? Where am I tweeting? So in which location am I? Because it can depend very much in which country you are, how much you can say, how much you cannot say. Then when am I tweeting? I'm tweeting during a pandemic, which is existential, the feelings it evokes. And then who is tweeting and at who am I tweeting? Why am I doing so? Why am I sending out a certain message? And then how am I conveying this message? What kind of language am I using? What kind of images am I using? So it's very important to think of these kind of aspects and points. So an example I've got, as you can see in the next slide, I have taken this picture from a PDF file on social media values from the American National Standards Institute, and they're responsible for the ISO and standards in the United States of America. And I have just inserted the link at the bottom in case you want to view the PDF file. So these are their social media values. So they say, be transparent, be honest, be passionate, be positive. That can be a difficult thing to do during the crisis. And add value with engaging and relative content. And then also play nice by not offending, criticizing, censoring, or picking fights. And then give credit where due and respect copyright. And number 6 is so important, remain impartial. And that is very difficult to do because then you have to override your emotions, take a deep breath, and try to get back into a spot where you won't be overwhelmed by, for example, anger. And 7, admit mistakes. Because, as I said, we're all humans and we're going to slip up sooner or later. Which is why what you also have to include in your social media policy, as you can see in the next slide, is a plan of action for a worst case scenario. Now, ideally, prevention is the best policy. And I have talked to several people, several clients, and many of them have said, I'm really careful with what I post on social media, so I don't think I will ever experience a crisis on social media, so I don't think I will ever be able to do much damage. But you never know, and the internet never forgets. You might post something which might sound innocuous, but you never know, it might rub someone else the wrong way. So that is why include a plan of action for a worst case scenario. So what you do if you do slip up on social media, what to do during a social media communication crisis. And there is a very unflattering or even vulgar word for a social media communication crisis. I'm sure you've heard of it often. It is called a shitstorm. So what you do during a shitstorm. So you can see in the next slide, just a few pointers. Respond quickly. So do not leave an angry person waiting and simmering and boiling over like a volcano which is about to explode or explode again if they have already exploded. Then try not to hit back. So all of us in communications or people who are working in customer support, if you've got an angry customer, hitting back is just about the worst thing you can do because it's going to escalate and it'll also damage the reputation of the company you work for or of your business. Don't ignore, because someone who's angry or emotional, they want to be heard. They do not want to be ignored. And they would like you to get back. They might even want to be soothed. So unless it's spam, which makes no sense at all, try not to ignore. Then, as I mentioned before, facts are very, very important. Gather and share factual information. Do not try to remain vague, remote, or something like that. And if you do not have factual information at hand, just say, we are trying to gather information at a moment, and we will get back to you with this information then and then. It's best to be as specific as possible about the time. Then if you are in a confrontation with someone, try to take the argument of view away from the public eye and go through email, or if it's even possible by phone. This obviously will work only in a smaller context, but if you have the possibility, you can try to do that. Then, after the storm is over, you might say, finally, whew, that's done. Wipe the sweat from your brow and say, so now that will never happen again. Are you sure about that? Think about what you can learn from this situation if it does happen to you. So sit down, You want to analyze and you want to evaluate afterwards. That way, you have learned something and you can learn what to do if you have another communication crisis. So, in order to summarize this session, I will just list 3 points, and that is a crisis like the coronavirus. It's going to lead to another crisis. There are going to be a lot of crisis hotspots caused by an overall crisis like the pandemic. Because the crisis is going to influence our reactions and the way we communicate, and that again can lead to a crisis. And we might want to express that on social media, which so many eyes around the world can see. Then what is so important is setting up a social media policy. No matter whether you're a small business, a one-person business, medium-sized enterprise, or a huge, vast business, it's important to have a list of do's and don'ts. And finally, we're human beings, as I said before. We are going to slip up sooner or later. We will also do so on social media. And so always plan for damage control. That way, you're well prepared because preparation is key.